King Artaxerxes of Persia would not believe it. His younger brother Cyrus could never bring an army as far as Babylonia, so the king was slow to gather a force of his own. Then a messenger arrived. Cyrus was approaching, and the royal army was still not ready. One thing worried Artaxerxes above all. Marching with his brother were 10,000 Greek hoplites. The king had nothing in his own ranks to match them. No body of soldiers in his empire was so fearsome or so respected. He commanded millions of subjects and the wealth of half the known world. And he was afraid of 10,000 foreign spearmen who had walked into the heart of his kingdom. His dread had deep roots. For everyone on that field, the last true pitched battle between Greeks and Persians lay 65 years in the past at the Eurymedon River. There the Athenian Cimon had stormed ashore from his victorious fleet and overwhelmed the Persian line. And from Marathon onward, the pattern never broke. In open pitch battle, the Persians had never once beaten Greek hoplites. Not at Marathon, 2 generations before. Not here at the Eurymedon. So, it was with real dread that Artaxerxes learned the truth. His own brother had gathered 10,000 of these men and led them into the heart of the kingdom. Cyrus and his men reached Babylonia long before they were expected. Artaxerxes took the troops he had, roughly 40 to 45,000, and marched north to confront his brother. The 2 armies met on a vast plain near the city of Babylon. Beside that plain stood a village called Cunaxa. The village gave its name to the battle fought there. Picture the ground, flat, dry, and immense, the Euphrates sliding along one edge. On it, 2 armies. On one side, the great king of all Persia. On the other, his own younger brother, who meant to take the throne by killing him. The enemy appeared at an awkward hour. It was early enough that a battle would be decided before nightfall, yet late enough that Cyrus's men had not eaten their midday meal, with no time left to prepare it. His 30,000 troops were strung out in a long, casual marching column. They had not expected to fight today. Now there was barely time to act. Officers shouted, men ran to their places. It was all they could do to gather, to form their lines, and to present a united front before Artaxerxes came into view. A hungry, hurried army, scrambling into order at the last possible moment. Cyrus set his battle order with care. He took the center himself, leading his finest Persian cavalry. On his left stood a loyal Persian noble named Arrhaeus, commanding the Asiatic troops, mostly light, mobile soldiers with lances, short spears, and javelins. On the right stood the 10,000 Greeks, drawn up only 4 ranks deep. Now, a normal hoplite phalanx formed 8 deep. The front rank pressed the enemy while the rear ranks waited, ready to step over the fallen and take their place. Cyrus halved that depth on purpose. He knew he was outnumbered, so he wanted his front as long as possible. Being outflanked is disaster for any army. By stretching the Greeks from the edge of his cavalry all the way to the Euphrates, he turned the river itself into a wall on his right, so his brother's men could never get around that flank. Then Artaxerxes' army crested the horizon, and the Greeks were dismayed. They had told themselves they would face an undisciplined horde. Nothing could have been further from the truth. They had expected barbaric war cries, the shouting of savages keeping up their courage. Instead, the royal army advanced in dead silence. Artaxerxes had deployed much as Cyrus had. His center was his cavalry, and he himself stood opposite his brother, center facing center. On his right, against Arrhaeus, massed the Asiatic troops, and on his left, facing the Greeks, stood the satrap Tissaphernes, brought all the way back from Lydia and Sardis to command the best men the king could muster, apart from his own household cavalry. Egyptian foot soldiers stood there too, and men drawn from across the whole empire. Before that, left wing rolled something the Greeks had never seen: scythe chariots. Long curved blades, the kind used to harvest wheat, had been bolted to the chariot axles. As the wheels turned, the blades spun out on either side. More blades hung beneath the chariot body, so that any man knocked to the ground would be cut to pieces. Their real power was probably terror, not tactics. But the terror was the point. The Greeks were shaken to see so much serious thought poured into one purpose: breaking a hoplite phalanx. Because in the phalanx, cohesion is everything. The line holds only as long as it stays unbroken. If a scythe chariot could tear open a single gap, the whole formation might come apart, and all would be lost. Cyrus left his post in the center and rode along the front of his army, speaking to his men, steadying them. The young Xenophon would remember stepping out of the ranks to trade a word with the prince as he passed. Reaching the Greek general Clearchus, Cyrus called him forward. Now that he had seen his brother's dispositions, he wanted a change of plan. Clearchus should shift the Greeks into the center to strike at the royal cavalry directly. Cyrus did not want his best soldiers wasted on the scythe chariots or on some unimportant part of the line. He wanted them aimed at his brother himself. Clearchus answered with a warning. He wanted Cyrus to keep clear of the fighting. What profit was there in winning the battle if the leader they fought for died in it? Cyrus refused. This, he said, was a duel between himself and his brother. He would forfeit all honor, Cyrus said, if he hung back and sent his men to do the dangerous work for him. But the Greeks must move to the center. Clearchus gave only a vague reply. He would see to it. In truth, Clearchus had no intention of obeying. His right wing rested on the Euphrates, and the river protected it. Here is the phalanx's hidden weakness. Every man carries his shield on his left arm, so each is covered by the shield of the man to his right, except the very last man at the right end of the line. With the unfordable Euphrates beside that rightmost man, the Greeks were perfectly safe. To move into the open center would expose those right-hand men, with nothing to guard that side. That single fear made Clearchus hold his ground, a choice that probably cost Cyrus the battle. The trumpet sounded. The war cries broke out. The Greeks surged forward at the quick march and saw the enemy melt away before them. It seemed a dream come true. There would be no real fight after all. So, they pressed on, drawn farther and farther past Artaxerxes' main army, chasing the retreating left wing. And on that wing rode Tissaphernes, mounted with a small band of cavalry, drawing them on. The Greeks followed, rejoicing, certain their enemies had lost their nerve. They did not see the trap. Every step forward pulled them away from Cyrus, away from the battle that actually mattered, and deeper into open ground. And the scythe chariots, the great terror weapon, accomplished nothing at all. Untested in real battle, their horses grew unruly. Many drivers simply turned them around and tried to retreat. A few horses proved so wild that they threw their drivers and bolted straight at the Greeks. But the phalanx simply opened its ranks, let each chariot rumble harmlessly through, and closed up again behind it. All that ingenuity, all that fear, undone by a calm sidestep. Only one man was foolish enough to stand his ground in the chariot's path. He alone was run down. Cyrus saw that the Greeks would not come to the center, so he charged straight at his brother's cavalry himself. He struck with such force that he broke it open and drove through. But like the Greeks, he pressed his advantage too far, too fast. He plunged into the heart of the cavalry melee, burning to reach the brother he hated. And he got close enough to drive a javelin into Artaxerxes' chest. The king was carried from the field and tended by his physician, a Greek named Ctesias of Xenophon. There had long been Greek doctors in royal Persian service, reaching back to Democedes of Croton, the physician King Darius once sent to scout the Greek world before the Ionian revolt. Ctesias dressed the wound on a nearby hilltop. He later wrote his own account of this battle, surviving only in fragments but offering an alternative to Xenophon's. But with Artaxerxes pulled from the fight, Cyrus found he had pushed too far ahead. He had outrun his own cavalry. Surrounded by his brother's men, he was dragged from his horse and killed on the ground. That should have ended the battle. But in the ancient world, there was no quick way to spread word that a fight was over. And on the right wing, the Greeks never learned that Cyrus had fallen. Now Tissaphernes turned on them, and at last they had a real battle on their hands. Outflanked and surrounded at one point, they fought on, until they saw a distant hill crowned with Persian cavalry. As they advanced, the enemy melted away yet again, and the Greeks took the height. From there, they looked out over a vast plain choked with dust, a churning confusion of horse, chariot, and foot, and could not tell what was happening. Puzzled that no messenger had come from Cyrus, and with the sun going down, the Greeks realized the fighting was over. Cunaxa had ended. They were sure they had won a great victory, and in their own corner of the field, they had. They had lost scarcely a man, but they had nowhere to go. They passed the night hungry and exhausted on their hill, waiting for morning, and with morning came the terrible news. They might have won their half of the battle, but Cyrus was dead. Without him, They had no leader, no paymaster, no purpose. They were now the strangest thing the ancient world had ever seen. A hostile city of armed men, set down in the middle of a great empire that had no idea what to do with them. Artaxerxes found them a grave embarrassment. He could not pay them. He could not take them into his own service. And he was not sure he could beat them in open battle. So negotiations opened. He asked them to surrender. They refused. At last, Tissaphernes, the wily satrap who had dealt with the Greeks all along, offered to act as go-between. He came to Clearchus and the other leaders with a simple proposal. The king would supply provisions if the Greeks agreed to leave his realm, and all the Greeks truly wanted was to get home. They might have pushed to the edge of Persian land and founded a Greek city somewhere, but that held no appeal. These were men who had marched out to seek their fortunes, hoping to grow rich in the war. Now they wished only to return, each to his own city. So they accepted the offer. Tissaphernes assembled a baggage train and told the Greeks one thing. They could not go home the way they had come. He had his reasons. The direct route ran back through his own satrapy, and the last thing he wanted was 10,000 armed Greeks loose on the plains of Lydia. But there was a darker design beneath the polite excuse. Tissaphernes meant to lead them into mountainous country, where they would lose their way, where they would starve, or be forced to surrender in small, broken groups, so that they would never again threaten him, or any other Persian. The guide who promised to bring them home was planning their destruction. The Greeks had no choice. They had no geographers among them, no map makers, and their baggage train had been plundered, a heavy loss that stripped them of most of their supplies, their equipment, and their camp followers. With what little remained, they agreed to march north behind Tissaphernes. They crossed the plains of Babylonia, fording this time not the Euphrates, but the Tigris. On the far bank, the mountains began to rise, and there Tissaphernes told them the hills were their road. He would lead them up through Armenia to the Black Sea, which he said was the nearest sea to them. And in this, for once, he was actually telling the truth. Their morale was crushingly low. Stage by stage, Cyrus had lured them ever deeper into Persia, and by the time of Cunaxa, they found themselves exactly where no Greek ever wished to be, some 1,500 miles from the coast of Asia Minor. There was an old warning about this very distance. Years earlier, in 499 BC, Aristagoras of Miletus had brought a map to Sparta. He wanted to show the Spartans the road into Persia from Sardis and Lydia, and he admitted it was a 3-month journey inland. That distance alone was enough. The Spartan king refused him outright. He would not even speak with a man who wished to draw the Spartans so far from the sea. Most of the 10,000 felt exactly the same. Appalled at their plight, they wanted only to get home as fast as they could. They were now in the heart of what we would call the Middle East. Think of the directions open to them. To the south lay Babylonia. To the southeast lay Persia proper, the great Iranian plateau, and the city of Susa, the king's own land. Eastward, toward the rising sun, stretched the Central Asiatic plateau, unknown and impassable. To the southwest ran the road down into Syria and the eastern Mediterranean, the coast of the Levant and the Phoenician cities. And to the west lay the land they had first crossed, the great block of Anatolia, Asia Minor. Every direction led into the empire or into the unknown. Having ruled out them all, they judged that north was their only choice, and they followed Tissaphernes, stage by stage, into the hills. They crossed a branch of the Tigris again and found themselves among the Carduchian mountains. This was genuinely wild country, in fact, beyond Persian control. It was a wedge of rugged land the great king had never conquered, where the hill tribes were a law unto themselves. And this was exactly where Tissaphernes wanted them. He hoped these mountains would be the killing ground. Here the 10,000 would be worn down by an Asiatic winter, by the trackless peaks, by losing their way, and by fierce tribesmen who would do the satrap's work for him. He did not need to defeat the Greeks. He only needed to lead them somewhere the land itself would. Then came the treachery. A fight broke out, probably engineered by Tissaphernes, between some Persians and some Greeks. Clearchus went to demand an explanation. Tissaphernes invited him to his tent to settle the matter, a great field pavilion like the one Xerxes had used in the Salamis campaign, and urged him to bring his colleagues along. Clearchus, again failing to think clearly, gathered all 4 of the other generals of the 10,000, with about 20 subordinate officers and a crowd of attendants. He meant to make a grand show of strength. The show proved his undoing. They reached the tent by a river whose name would live in infamy in Greek memory, the Greater Zab. Only the 5 generals were let inside, where they were seized and bound. The 20 officers waiting outside were cut down where they stood. Then the Persians mounted and rode among the milling attendants, killing them one by one with their lances, in silence, without warning. One man escaped, a Greek slashed across the belly, who rode back to camp, holding his guts in and shouting, "Treachery! The generals have been killed." At once the Greeks snatched up their shields and formed their lines. But Tissaphernes had no wish to fight them. They were to be left to their fate. He would shadow their march through the mountains and never give them the one thing they wanted, a pitched battle they were sure to win. This endless harassment was something they were not sure they could survive. So, the 10,000 in the heart of Asia did what Greeks did. They sat down and held an assembly. Everyone had the right to speak, and every idea was heard, an echo of the old belief that the best choice emerges only when many voices are weighed. In the end, the army elected 5 new generals to lead them out. Among the new generals was Xenophon, a young Athenian in his 20s, a somewhat bookish man who had studied with Socrates. He was chosen to command the rear of the column, with 4 others, all more prominent, placed ahead of him up to the vanguard. Not knowing what else to do, they resolved to push on north, as Tissaphernes had first proposed, and fight their way through the mountains. It is hard to convey how much courage this took. Winter was closing in. On the Babylonian plains they had baked in high summer. Now cold winds began to lash them, and they had neither proper clothing nor proper supplies for what lay ahead. The one mercy of this route was water, plentiful springs and mountain streams. In every other respect, they were in desperate condition. Still they pushed northward, guided by the North Star, and their feel for where the trails led. Tissaphernes harried their rear, where Xenophon marched with sudden lightning attacks, and the hill tribes, also refusing a stand-up fight, climbed the cliffs above the trails and rolled rocks and avalanches down upon them. Many men died. There is no worse ground for a hoplite, no level place to deploy, no room to form the phalanx. The army strung out thin along narrow mountain tracks. That any of them survived at all is remarkable. At last, in the depth of winter, they reached a river and were told that safety lay on the far side, the Persian province of Armenia. But on that longed-for shore stood a Persian army under Anabasis, satrap of Armenia, who meant to stop them. And behind them came the hill tribes, who had caught the Greeks between themselves and the water. Then 2 young soldiers, gathering firewood, found a hidden ford where the river barely reached their waists. Xenophon devised a plan, feinting at one crossing and slipping the army over at another, until the whole force reached the far bank. They had crossed into Armenia and into the deep snows, with the sea still far away.